Hey, what's up, everybody? Good morning, and happy to be here. Today, we have a very interesting chat. I'll be speaking with Fitzy. Those of you that have been on spaces with me might have crossed paths with us, but today we get to dive into some of the amazing things that he's working on and all the cool things as far as what's happening with track systems and clear up some misconceptions, some questions that may arise because a lot of times when we're on spaces, sometimes it gets a little bit technical. So the beautiful thing about this is not only does he understand the tech, but he's also a marketing guy. So really appreciate you coming on here, Fitzy, and having this discussion. So welcome to the pod or stream, I should say. And thanks for taking the time out with us today.
No, pleasure to be here. We've had many great conversation, obviously, on the weekly spaces and stuff. And yeah, sometimes we go into some, what's the word, like warm water. Let's not say hot water. Let's just say warm water. Warmer waters than some people like around the Bitcoin stuff. But no controversy here, really. It's actually nice to actually do this on stream because it's obviously we have great chats in the spaces. For anybody that doesn't know, and this is the first time tuning into the Wolf podcast or the Wolf, I was saying podcast, the Wolf stream.
Yeah,
right.
me too.
This gentleman right here is one of the best hosts in the space, so it's always a pleasure. And yeah, happy to get into whatever tap, track, anything AI. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. Hopefully, we won't cross into politics too much. But yeah, I'm sure as usual, it'll be an interesting one.
Yeah, so you said, sometimes it gets a little heated, a little confusion sometimes. And a lot of the times, because Bitcoin, as we like to say all the time, is really what someone makes it to be. So whether you are solving monetary problems in Zimbabwe or you are looking at the immutable storage of the Constitution or something of that nature, people can use Bitcoin for all sorts of different things. And I think that's sort of the reason why it gets a little heated from time to time because people get so passionate about the corner of Bitcoin in which they're in. But I'm really excited to speak about this because, Tap does a lot of things that really we thought was pretty much impossible. The reason why a lot of people moved to L2s and different chains, now you could do that with Bitcoin. So I'm a little excited to hear a little bit about that. So what is Tap? What are you guys working on? And Track, I should say, the Track networks, and why is this such an exciting thing?
So it's such a broad topic. Like we could literally go anywhere, and I'm sure we will. We have around an hour here, probably, right? Mm-hmm. And so we'll cover a lot. So if we start with the company, right? Let's just start with Track Systems, that's created both Tap protocol and Track network. So these are two very different protocols / networks, but when combined, they're very powerful. Alone, they're very powerful, and nobody has to use both. Somebody could use just Tap on the Bitcoin side, or Track and go beyond, including Bitcoin, but can go far beyond, as I'm sure we'll get into. So I think if we began then with Tap. So Tap is, base level, a Bitcoin meta protocol built directly on Bitcoin, directly on top of ordinals, and its programmability. So smart contracts for the audience, it's smart contracts for Bitcoin, but of course you can't put a smart contract directly into Bitcoin, so you need to build a different additional infrastructure, and that's what Tap is. So that is for anybody who's never come across Tap or Track, but Tap specifically. If we just say Bitcoin programmability, smart contracts on L1, that's what Tap protocol is.
That's really exciting too, because I remember when I first came to the space, speaking to a lot of developers, and a lot of them originally started off as Bitcoiners, but then they found different problems that they wanted to solve, but they couldn't. And even though they were hardcore Bitcoiners, because they wanted to build certain things, that's why they ended up shifting out. And they lost a lot of friends, if you will. It got a little tense within their circles. But the main thing is they would have built it on Bitcoin if they could have. So that's why I think this is just really interesting. And so how do you go about what you guys are offering, and how do you work with developers and so forth to actually solve their problems using this protocol?
So I think one of the things that I always, well, not always, but often forget to mention is that it's an open source protocol. Okay, so this is very much being created and then given out for anybody that wants to use it, right? It's not one of these things where we build things and we don't show anybody how it works and we just say, hey, come to this website and build an app and don't worry about what's under the hood. We actually very proudly show and talk about at length, as you know, from our conversations about what happens. So I think then in terms of what we do for developers, again, I'll try to use less super technical language and you know, feel free to go deeper, but it's a Bitcoin toolkit. So if you want to build an app that is more than just let's say more than just trading, because of course people love trading. We have AMMs. In fact, Tap has the first ever back in 2020. I lose track of the years now. Someone's going to quote me wrong here, but let's just say the end of 2023, or maybe beginning of 2024. It was the first Bitcoin automated market maker. So one of the core DeFi primitives needed to do complex things, you know, complex apps, sophisticated applications, and so liquidity pools, things like Taproot or RuX, it's now called. It was called Taproot. I mean, I could probably, or should probably, be sort of maybe bringing up some of the sites on the screen. So I'll aim to do that at some point, just to show people rather than just explain. Is it going to allow me to do that, do you think, or?
Yeah, I believe so. It should present or invite. Yeah, it should.
Yeah.
Right on the bottom.
Yeah, let's have a look. Let's see if it lets me do that. Rather than just talking, it's always good to show.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah, so Taproot swap, renamed to RuX. So it's a full suite of products. So you have an inscription tool, you have swaps, you have trading, and you have bridges. So the AMM that I talked about, the thing that you need to have this be completely decentralized without any multi-sigs or without anything else that's custodial. That's what Tap enables. So complex financial tooling. And so bridge is one of the really cool things that we have. Tap has a bridge with Ethereum. And we already have Ethereum assets that are on Bitcoin through this bridge. And we also have our tokens that are built natively on Bitcoin, trading over on Ethereum, right? So that's actually a really, really, and again, I hate to kind of always pull back and explain a little bit more, but many people talk about, we allow you to do trading elsewhere, we allow you to do this, we allow you to do that. It is only Tap that enables it to be done without custodial solutions in the middle, without somebody else having control, without you losing custody of your assets, you know, without you giving additional trust to someone that you've never met, right? And it's usually on the teams.
Really
when we talk about things, when we talk with Tap, there is none of that. And I guess, because that's obviously a huge claim for people that haven't followed our trajectory over the last few years, but it's enabled through something called co-processing. So Tap can have a Bitcoin assets directly on Bitcoin, on the Meta protocol, being manipulated by smart contracts from other chains. So that's one cool way that you can bring programmability into Bitcoin, but you don't lose custody, and that is key. It's called L1 co-processing. It's also something that we pioneered at Tap Protocol. So yeah, bridging, things like staking. Let me come back out of here. Where were we? Trading. In fact, I've just realized it's not even showing you the screens that I'm coming through. But the point being here, these are the financial applications that Bitcoiners are used to having in the last few years since Ordinals went live and we started getting more programmability. But there isn't the compromise of security or custody. That's what a suite of products like RuX or Taproot Swap, as it was previously known, on Bitcoin, by being built on Tap, it enabled these things. So let me come out of there for now.
To this, would you like go back to that, or?
That's fine. Yeah, you do all the controls.
yeah, no worries. Yeah,
I was trying to do two things at once. So
no, trust me, it's quite difficult. But like, I think this is really interesting. A few points I want to dive into before we move on and get really complicated. I think it's really interesting that because like you said, you're doing this stuff natively on Bitcoin and allowing all this functionality, because one of the big things, as I said, a lot of people that I know originally started off as Bitcoiners, but because they're developers, they wanted to build certain things that just wasn't possible. And I think it's really interesting that, you said that it was the Ordinals protocol and what Casey did with, as far as a building on Bitcoin, that really opened up a huge door, which I think is really funny because that was very controversial at the time.
Yeah.
Now it's not as much, but at the time it was very controversial, and I thought it was just really interesting to see the Bitcoin camp split, if you will, in that you had one corner that was absolutely hating it, then the other side was like, oh, this is so cool. We don't have to go to ETH anymore. We don't have to do all this other stuff, because now we can do this where we actually want to build and do this interesting thing. And it created so much demand for blocks, block space, that it was just really interesting to see it play out in the timeline. But going forward, what has that been like? Has things calmed down? Do people kind of understand what's going on now and the benefits of building on Bitcoin, or is that still a point of contention that you still see?
I think you're almost asking a rhetorical question, right? Because again, back to the spaces that we're on, we know there is, as you said at the head of the show, there are many different camps in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and a lot of the time this ends up being clashing. And absolutely, like it was controversial. It still is controversial that people like us want to do more than just send BTC around, right? That is controversial to some people, and we're certainly not here to change their mind. Although there are times, I remember at a conference in Amsterdam, Bitcoin Amsterdam, and there was a guy came over and he was wearing, just to give you set the scene, full Bitcoin suit, right? Full Bitcoin suit. And I clocked him and I was like, this guy's a Bitcoin maxi, like for sure. Like, but let's chat to the guy and see. And he came over to the booth. He said, what's TAP? We explained it's a meta protocol that allows programmability and more complex applications, as you say, as people are used to in other ecosystems. And I was expecting him to be, pretty negative, and he wasn't. He just said, "I'm not saying that I'm using these things. Like, I'm definitely not using Bitcoin for these things at that time." And he asked me a simple question. He said, "How does this benefit Bitcoin? How does this benefit miners? If you tell me from that perspective, maybe we can meet in the middle." And I won't go into the full conversation, but the kind of TLDR was, if you can add more applications, more use cases securely without changing Bitcoin's code whatsoever, so dealing with it as it is and then finding solutions around it, not changing it, right? Bitcoin is Bitcoin. It's great as it is, right? If we can find more solutions that bring more activity, more people that want to spend Bitcoin natively, means that more people need to hold Bitcoin, which means that your Bitcoin is worth more. It means there's more activity on the network. That means there's more revenue for the miners, and the greater the security budget for the network, where all this value is stored. And if we want Bitcoin to really keep on scaling, you need to make sure the amount of money those miners are getting is at least keeping pace, relatively to the amount of value stored. You don't want to secure a $2 trillion network value, whatever you want to say, with the same amount of money that you store a $100 trillion network with. You have a security disparity there, right? That needs the budget for the miners, the budget as we call it, needs to increase. So I said something along those lines. He shook my hand, smiled, walked away. There was no beef. I didn't try and convince him to download an app. I didn't try and to convince him to come and do shit coins on Bitcoin or buy an NFT, right? It was just, so it is controversial, but over time, I think that will always decrease, and there'll be more and more people, as we've seen, using and demanding Bitcoin, RWAs, tokenization, trading, and stuff like that. But I think at this point of the conversation, it's always worth acknowledging that when you're using something that's pure Bitcoin like TAP, you're still bound by 10-minute blocks. So the thing that is going to be not as widely adopted from, say, the Ethereum or the Solana people, or any chain, right, would be an app that doesn't necessarily have the instant UX or quicker UX. And so that's where more like Track Network comes in. I mentioned co-processing. Track Network can be a co-processor for Bitcoin via TAP. And then you can do some even more less bound by Bitcoin block things, let's just say, more instant, lightning fast stuff. And we'll get into that, I'm sure. But that's why the tap part and the track part we keep separate, and then we talk about how they converge, because I think it adds greater context to the conversation and the why does tap exist part.
I think it's a couple of things that I remember being on the space, and it was actually about the security budget. That was the most, I would say, contentious space that we're on. Some people believe there is no security budget issue and so forth, and we're going back and forth. And it was very interesting. And the conversation really shifts differently when you speak to miners. So it's very different from like the guys who are speaking about money, the guys that are speaking about trading. Then there's the miners. There's so many parties that are involved in this, and understanding there's so many moving parts. I think that's sort of why it gets so contentious, is because if you're only in one box, very few people cross over to every single one of these conversations and understand what the other parties' problems are and what their interests are and how they keep their, I guess you'd say, either their business or their operations, what they're building and what they're working on going. So I think that's why there is, I guess you'd say, a little disconnect. And certain times it gets contentious. But when you take time to have conversations like we're having, listening to the different parts and say, wow, there's way more to this thing than I ever thought, I think that's when the walls start to come down. And that's why I'm really excited to dive into this and really go into it. But the one question that I do have related to what you said, co-processing. Now, that I've heard co-mining, but I've never heard co-processing. Could you explain a little bit exactly what that means?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we say co-processing, just to be clear, this is nothing to do with mining. Okay. So mining is a separate conversation. And I think I'm sure we'll come on to that stuff as well, because there's some really big things happening with TAP and partnerships with miners and literally providing additional revenue to miners through a second block subsidy. So that's something we've talked about on Spaces, but we haven't yet gone there. But in terms of co-processing, right, I have this thing that's been sat on my desk for a couple of years now, and it didn't used to be a thing that I used, but I always use it now. And it's a plug adapter, right? So this is going to sound like it's technical, but hopefully this kind of just makes it a bit easier for people who, again, haven't understood what TAP is or haven't kind of, heard any of us speak about it. So you can't write a smart contract directly into Bitcoin. Just baseline for anybody that doesn't know, it's still that it doesn't work. It doesn't support it. It's not complex enough of a protocol to support a smart contract. That's why you have everyone building an L2 and or a side chain or a roll up. But ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, all of those things share what is our non-negotiable. And our non-negotiable is you should never be giving up custody of your Bitcoin assets to somebody else inside some kind of multi-sig or custodial solution. So TAP sits very much there. So the solution that we come up with is co-processing. So you have other networks, for example, Ethereum, or we actually used ICP to prove the theory a couple of years ago, but also our own network, Track Network, can do this as well. So co-processing. So smart contracts exist on, let's say, ICP or Track Network, right? Instant, fast, cheap, right? But you want to be able to control Bitcoin assets. So TAP protocol was built on top of Bitcoin, on top of ordinals. So you got Bitcoin, then ordinals, and then you plug TAP protocol in. And the smart contracts from Track Network can connect in here. The smart contracts from ICP could connect in here. You could do Solana. Over the coming years, there'll be more and more chains that enable it. But for now, if we just use Track Network, that's where we can bring in something that's like an actual real life application that's working today. And it really helps demonstrate the point. So there is an app called Hypermall built on Track Network, or built with Track Network, let's say. Instant trading, including Bitcoin assets, right? And so, in fact, there's probably two. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. There's two parts to the conversation here. I'll stick, in fact, with, for this part of the example, I'll stick with what we had earlier with the RuX website, right? So you want to do a swap and a bridge across to Ethereum, right? The smart contracts are written in a secure L1 that people trust, and they speak to Bitcoin via TAP protocol and manipulate the assets. And the user is using their standard Bitcoin wallet they've gone to a website, they've connected their wallet, they have the Bitcoin assets, they want to bridge them here, or they want to swap them in a liquidity pool, right? And they give up zero custody because the logic, the brain, the smart contracts, the brains of the outfit is not on Bitcoin, but it's connecting directly with Bitcoin via tap protocol. So that might be overly complex. I'm not too sure if that did make sense, but essentially you can have logic that exists elsewhere that control assets on Bitcoin, and the user key point doesn't have to give up custody of their assets. And that's unique to tap. The side chains, the L2s, the rollups, there is always a custodial component, which means the user is trusting somebody else. With tap, that never happens, ever happens, to be very, very, very clear. Never, ever, ever.
That is something that we obviously care about. We don't necessarily like centralized exchanges. That is one of the things, not your keys, not your crypto, or not your keys, not your Bitcoin. That is something that, mottos and mantras that we all use and are used to. But I noticed like multiple times we're talking about various apps and trading and swaps. Is I assume that the number one use case would be in that, but what other use cases? Because not everyone listening ever trades their Bitcoin or ever wants to swap, but what other applications have you seen people use to build using these things and functionalities that just wasn't possible otherwise?
So financial tooling, obviously, within the whole of crypto, within the whole of Web3. I don't want to throw a random percentage out there, but people use it for financial things 9 times out of 10. But you could, and I think I've mentioned this already, but like it's all about user experience, right? So if you want to build a game, right? Again, you could use smart contracts, you could have it incorporate Bitcoin assets on Tap Protocol. You could do that. But if you do that from a pure Bitcoin perspective and you don't utilize anything like again, I probably should have gone into the track network stuff a bit earlier than this, but if you did a game and you were playing and you wanted to incorporate some Tap Protocol, L1 Bitcoin assets, you would be waiting for the chain, right? You would be waiting 10 minutes. So I can't think of any game unless it was chess and it was an incredibly slow move that somebody was making, right? But, where you would be happy, where that app would find product market fit, where it would scale, where you would get users, where there would basically be a need for, a game. So I would say there's very niche use cases. We see Bitcoin gaming, but it's gamified monetary stuff usually, right? Or maybe like a Tamagotchi style thing. But again, like it's not a very dynamic game, right? And so if you use Bitcoin for that, it's just not going to be as useful to you for that, right? This is where the other stuff comes in. This is where the track network part comes in, because you could build a game, and you can build a game. There actually already is, Doom, OG Doom.
Yep, absolutely. That was one of the mind-blowing moments for me when they put Doom on there, and because it's like, how'd they even put this? But anyways, I went down that rabbit hole, figured out how Doom actually processes, and it's actually a lot lighter lift in compute than I ever assumed. But anyways, yeah, those 90s computers, definitely they had to figure out a very innovative way. But go on, I'm sorry.
So yeah, the point I was going to make was if you wanted to use Tap Protocol only, so pure Bitcoin, right, without having let's just say if you want to just use pure Bitcoin, it's not going to be conducive with gaming 9 times out of 10, and it's not going to be conducive. Like you can't stream your podcast through it or anything like this. Like that amount of throughput, it doesn't work. It's not built for that. The network is more a store of value, I think, as we see over time. That's where I truly believe it goes. And so value settlement, value storage, and financial things will, RWA, for example, will be huge, right? But the gaming example, just to kind of give you the black and the white version of this, if you build the game on track, for example, like Doom, right? Today it doesn't have any Bitcoin or any crypto integration. But if we wanted to add crypto integration, we could. And you could have a game that is instant finality. So it's streaming directly on network, not somewhere else like we get with 99.9% of crypto gaming. They're not actually running the game on the network, because blockchains They can't support that, right? The throughput, it just does not, it would not work. It does not work. And you don't see it, really happening in that world. It's probably why Web3 gaming hasn't really scaled, because they're trying to solve a problem that's not really going to be solvable. So you take it off chain. Track network is not a chain. It is a decentralized network, but it is blockless. So you can run things like full games directly on the network. And so imagine you were playing a game and you won a prize, a sword or something, and you wanted to withdraw that to Bitcoin. Then you can do that because you have Track Network and you have Tap Protocol. You can say, we're playing the game here on this decentralized network. I found this asset and it's a Bitcoin game. Let's just say they only do Bitcoin assets. They could do any chain they want, to be honest, with Track. It can settle value to literally any chain, literally any chain. But if it was a Bitcoin game, you build your game there, you don't have any issues or any constraints. It's instant finality. It's all fully on chain. You're not even using the cloud, by the way. This is a peer-to-peer app layer. So it's a peer-to-peer execution layer for the devs. But you can say, hey, this person wants to withdraw their asset. They want to actually get their asset and own that asset as an ordinal, as an NFT on Bitcoin. You can do that. And that's where it probably makes more sense for a lot of the digital world's use cases. You can utilize Bitcoin for where you want your asset to live, but what you don't want to rely on Bitcoin for is how fast it is, how great the throughput is, the finality, because the block time is 10 minutes, but the finality, people don't realize this, i.e. when the transaction, the action that the user wanted is fully immutable. For Bitcoin, that's about an hour. So finality and block times, TPS people call it another metric, but like these things, Bitcoin, I'm trying to just explain, is not really made for a lot of the application types that we see. People said they did it, and it turned out they weren't on Bitcoin. There was custodial solutions. You were losing custody of your assets. And again, as we said, and I keep making clear, that's a non-negotiable. We don't do that. So Track is there for anybody that wants to build Bitcoin integrated things, still fully decentralized, still with full self-custody, but instant finality, amazing UX, flat gas fee. So hopefully that ties the two things together a bit more clearly. You don't need to do everything fully on Bitcoin, because we also built Track as well, and you still keep self-custody. So I'm repeating myself, but
yeah,
these are the important parts.
I think it's worth explaining and going deeper into, because a lot of times when we hear about Track or we hear about other things, automatically, most people, their mind goes to, oh, this is another chain trying to compete with Bitcoin, not understanding what a network is. And, when my mind, when I was listening to you, automatically my mind went to, hey, this kind of reminds me of, and now this could be entirely wrong, but this is where my mind went. This reminds me of back in the day when we were using Napster, LimeWire, Kazaa, and all those like networks that weren't decentralized and they were connecting peer to peer. But at the same time, too, my mind also went to, I bet poker players would really love this, because imagine playing a game of poker and you're using sats and like you're actually, not giving up any custody, locking it somewhere on some platform to play a game. But that'd be very interesting to see if that doesn't already exist. But that's just where my mind went. And I thought that was just really cool. And I think it's worth noting here and explaining to anyone that's listening. Again, this is not a competition or something competing with Bitcoin. It's adding functionality and tying into what Bitcoin does without trying to, quote unquote, steal away from the network. And that's what I think is really interesting, is that things are being built that would be being built elsewhere, but now you can actually tie into Bitcoin. And that's why I find it very interesting, and actually wanted a little bit of clarity. And there's a lot of misconceptions about this, but hopefully, did I say anything that was just like completely off? Did I misunderstand anything that you were saying? Because I don't want to confuse the audience.
No, not at all. And I think, when you get into these conversations, and I've learned in the last few years working, even just for this company, there are certain people will not and don't want to and absolutely don't have to understand the technical things that people talk about. But what happens is these debates start on the timeline, and then we all know what like crypto Twitter is like. It's basically tribal. And so people are going up against each other. And also that it's a phrase that I've used for a while now, but certainly in the ordinals world in the last 3 years, certain language has just been bastardized, right? So one person's decentralized and another's mean totally different things, right? Peer-to-peer is another one, and you bring up things like Napster and LimeWire, right? Peer-to-peer is a word we hear with Bitcoin, right? So peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer cash, peer-to-peer network, peer-to-peer, 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 peer-to-peer. The thing that surprises a lot of people when I tell them this and I explain it hopefully in a clear way is Bitcoin as a network was created as peer-to-peer cash. But I would bet whoever watches this show, barely even 1%, let's say 5% max, will have ever used Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer manner, right? Because in order to use Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer manner, you need to run a node. That is my node talking to your node, and we transact like Satoshi and Hal Finney would have back in the day. What we don't do is that. What we do is we download an app that someone on X told us to download, which is fine. None of this is a problem, right? It's just not how we do things, right? So people will download an app and they will do it in a way that's either custodial to somebody else or not even understanding that. And you're using things that are going via the cloud. So I have an app that's running on AWS's servers, right? That I download onto my phone. And when I ask to do a transaction, it pings that request through to AWS, right? That actually executes the transaction. It actually does the pushing and pulling of the transactions of the Bitcoin or the ordinals from my wallet to somebody else's wallet, right? Point being, there are people in the middle. So peer-to-peer networks are incredibly valuable. Peer-to-peer platforms back in the day were super valuable, but they didn't have a coordination layer. They couldn't speak to one another. And if somebody took the server down, like LimeWire, for example, poof, it's gone.
Yeah.
Because that truth
I'm old
only
enough to remember that.
Exactly, me too, right? I think we're similar age. So like that is the difference between a peer-to-peer platform and peer-to-peer tech back in the day. So Track is a peer-to-peer network, right? It's a peer-to-peer execution layer. So I can download my app here, whether it's using Bitcoin assets or Track assets or Ethereum assets or whatever assets, whatever kind of wallets the dev wants to build into it. It is basically like tabula rasa for anybody that does Latin, right? Like an empty vase, like you just put in what you want. And it sits above chains here, not in a, sits above chains, isn't it amazing? But like if you visualize it, all these chains have assets, but you want to be able to coordinate between them and you want to execute things peer to peer. You want to keep custody. And what you don't want to do is have to have AWS or Google Cloud, which we know goes down. And if they don't go down, Cloudflare goes down, right? These things go down and they can be switched off because they're not living in the phone or the laptop of the user. So Track is a full peer-to-peer network, as in the network is kind of like within the actual device, within the app that you download. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. It doesn't matter whether the Google goes down or Amazon goes down or Cloudflare has an issue. It doesn't matter because as long as you have the internet and this app, let's say Hypermall, the trading app that I mentioned for Bitcoin assets, and you've got Hypermall and access to the internet, we can trade peer-to-peer instantly with Bitcoin assets and at any point withdraw them to Bitcoin wallet, right? But there is nobody in the middle. All of that is instant. And in fact, I'm trying not to go down all the rabbit holes that I usually do. But peer-to-peer app, just by downloading something on your phone, rather than Bitcoin, where it's a peer-to-peer cash, but I have to have a huge amount. I think it's something like 700 gig right now, just to download a Bitcoin node and then figure out how to actually trade. 99.9% of people will never do that. So it's not competing with Bitcoin. Its Track is, in fact, going to help Bitcoin because it will help people use it and settle value there, like I think RWAs and gaming and trading and all these things without the UX issues that you might get if you only built purely on Bitcoin. But also, Track is literally built in the model of Bitcoin. It is this actual peer-to-peer network. But the key difference is 16 years later, it figured out a way to make it so small and so light that every app that you download, you're essentially carrying the full network with you within it, and a wallet and a node and the smart contracts, they're all running completely behind the scenes. You don't know it, but it's fully peer-to-peer with just the internet, with optional settlement to Bitcoin. And that's where it ties back into Bitcoin. So hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, we covered a lot there, and I think it's worth noting too that all the time on Spaces, I'll bring this up. Like, if you look at the old forum post from Hal Finney, he saw a world in which different layers and different plugins, if you will, would be needed, because even at that time, he thought, and it's all out there, is well documented, that the future wasn't everyone transacting every cup of coffee or whatever it might be on the local, the Bitcoin network. And they were, he saw, he didn't say Lightning because Lightning didn't exist then, where all these other different things. He even wrote about Bitcoin banks and all. It was just mind blowing, the stuff. He's like, he saw the future. And, anyways, without him knowing that these types of peer-to-peer networks would come up, I'm pretty sure like he foresaw the world in which they would exist. So, we covered a lot of these different things. And one thing I wanted to kind of pivot back towards is like the sustainability of this, because you said it's helping the network, it's helping everything. So could you explain a little bit more onto how this helps, to benefit Bitcoin and like the sustainability of everything going on and on going forward?
Yeah, so if we go back over to Tap protocol to begin this, because both Track and Tap, as we mentioned, they're kind of they interact, they intersect, they can cooperate with, interoperate with. But I think that we alluded to it earlier. We spoke about the Bitcoin miners' security budget, i.e., how much money they get every 10 minutes. And the more they get, the more they can keep throwing electricity at the network because they can afford to pay their bills, which is always nice. And that's good for Bitcoin, right? We want all those things to go up and to the right, not just the price. So we partnered with, in fact, no, let's not get ahead of myself. Back at the end of 2023, somebody launched a token, the Block Runner guys, if you know Will and Iman, one of the best Bitcoin podcasts around, the Block Runner podcast, they launched a token called NAT, N-A-T, and it was on Tap protocol, right? And this token was free and fair community mint, and it's using, I won't go into this too deeply, but for anybody that wants to look into it, it's something really cool called digital matter. So using Bitcoin's organic block data to enable the creation or the cadence of creation, but the actual creation of either tokens or ordinals, right? Non-fungibles. And so they were launching this on Tap because they realized that you could do some incredibly complex things with Tap, really programmable things, let's say. And this token found the community. I think right now there's 20-something thousand, let's say 23, 24,000 holders of this token. But about a year ago, in fact, it was pretty much almost a year ago, it was February 2025, Tap upgraded the protocol to enable this NAT token, which is created via Bitcoin in every single block, right, automatically, without changing Bitcoin's code. Before anybody, again, tries to challenge that in the comments, but without changing anything with Bitcoin's code, this token is produced every block, every 10 minutes, right? A certain amount is produced, just like BTC itself. But there was a bot that was someone built to just take the token. And so essentially one person had kind of gamed the system, gone away and built a bot that was taking every 10 minutes some of the supply of this NAT. And that's not great for anybody, right? It's just making one person rich who didn't buy it. They're just kind of like automatically kind of like pulling it out of the chain. Again, not going to go complex on that, but not a good thing, not a good thing. And so we enabled something called the miner redirect mechanism. And so now nobody since February, the block 885588, end of Feb last year, so about a year, this token now is automatically paid to miners who get the block. So whoever gets the block gets the BTC. They also get this additional token called NAT. And 4 of the 5 largest miners, so Spider Pool, F2 Pool, via BTC, and Ant Pool, There's only Foundry from the top 5 that hasn't yet taken some, realized and kind of like, took some, distributed some, sold some, right? So 4 of the top 5 have. And this is additional revenue, albeit relatively small at this time, but it proved the theory that you can have if you build a protocol like TAP directly on the L1, right? And it's programmable enough that it can do some kind of cool, complex things that can track Bitcoin activity and trigger tokens to be released or trigger NFTs like Natcats, for example, if anybody knows Natcats, that's created on TAP protocol using digital matter as well, using organic Bitcoin data. But again, I'm trying not to go super deep. That is an additional revenue without changing Bitcoin's code, which is giving now, not so much, but it could be, it all depends on the market cap. If the market cap goes up and more miners keep, we partnered with Spiderpool, by the way, and they're actually integrated. I think they have, at this point today, fully integrated TAP protocol into their miner dashboard, and they'll be releasing it for all their miners soon, where they can access their NAT tokens themselves, right? So that makes it more in the realm of, oh, miners are going to start figuring out about it. Oh, what is this? Oh, it's additional revenue. Oh, well, that's good for us. Well, what is this token? Who's that? And, you start to get a flywheel going of value. So again, I can hear myself definitely over explaining it, but TAP protocol, one token has proven on our protocol that you can increase miners' bottom lines and allow them to stay online mining longer, which is better. Higher the hash rate is, of course, a good metric. That's the kind of thing you can do with TAP protocol because it's more programmable, and key point, it is literally built on L1 on top of Bitcoin, on top of ordinals. There we have TAP. So that's not needing anything external. This is a TAP protocol thing. And so additional miner revenue is one of the cool things that someone's figured out how to do in the last few years.
So rather than miners chasing this AI hype and trying to shift their resources over to making a profit somehow through compute and doing AI, they could look into this possibly and see where they can maximize it. Because in theory, if I'm understanding this correctly, and by the way, I am not running some sort of mining business, so this is not for my own benefit, but just for clarity, it is just that since it worked on a small scale with one individual example, or maybe you have other examples too as well, then someone who is possibly looking to find other revenue other than going the AI route, they could just look at what worked there and just try to optimize that and try to figure out how to, I guess you'd say, get more juice out of the fruit, if you will. Is that what I'm, a good way of kind of looking at it? Because I'm seeing how, or trying to connect the dots for, if I were a miner, I was running a business, how would I be looking at this conversation and staring to that right there? Would it be, rather than trying to go the AI route, I might be able to look into this?
So I think more juice out of the fruit is a great phrase. That's probably what I should have used. Much more simpler. I think the specific question about, should we be not looking at AI? Should they not be looking so much at AI? I think they absolutely will be, and they should be looking at AI, right? There's a lot of money there to be made. We do a lot of work in AI. Can't really talk about it too much, but there's the company is, we currently, what can I say? We have an enterprise AI solutions part of the business that is being stood up currently. And we're already demoing our local AI, so cloudless AI for business, for enterprise.
You heard it here first, folks.
with a few of the people from the community would have heard this, but yeah, I'm not going to say much detail because I'll say the things that have already been made public knowledge. We already are demoing it with a bank here in Europe, and that's so AI. That's just to say AI for sure. The miners, people who have got the money to build these massive, warehouses of compute, they're going to be looking at AI. But in terms of the specific question about what should miners be thinking when they hear us talk about these sort of things with TAP and the NAT token and this additional block reward, right? It's optional. They don't have to. People get angry about the conversation around NAT. And it's like, we haven't changed Bitcoin's code. It's automatically being generated. Nobody else can get the hand on it. No bot can get the hand on it. And if the miner wants to take it, then great. And if they don't, then they won't. But as I've said, 4 out of the top 5 mining pools around the world, and that's around about 60% of the entire hash rate, has acknowledged and taken some of this token, sold some, and achieved profit. And whether that bought them 1 hour of electricity or whether it bought them a Big Mac, it actually doesn't matter at this point, because this is still super early, but it's proven the point. So miners looking at this should be thinking, if the mining pool I'm mining for isn't Spider Pool, F2 Pool, Via BT, or Ant Pool, the chances are the actual pool doesn't know about this token yet, right? So I would say, call to action, tell them that there is an additional block reward, and they should deserve it if they're adding hash to the pool, right? The second thing I would say, if you are one of those miners and you are with any other mining pool than Spider Pool, and you're currently providing your hash there, you might want to just keep an eye on Spider Pool's socials, because they will soon be, I mentioned we had the Tap Protocol Spider Pool partnership a few months ago, and they're about to launch this dashboard. So they will make it available and they will distribute it to their miners. And this all sounds complex, but basically, if you are providing hash to Spider Pool, you can make more money than somewhere else if that pool is giving you an additional reward for the hash that you provide, right? So more revenue, better than less revenue. 2 block rewards, better than 1 block reward. And once Spider Pool start actually fully marketing this, and of course we'll be amplifying that in the coming months, I strongly predict that some of the other ones will follow suit, because if you're marketing from Spider Pool and you can say, come and contribute to our pool because you will take home more money, right? Even if it's $5, $10, but when the value of the token goes up, the value of the amount that comes out per block goes up. Higher market cap equals higher value of NAT that comes out per block for those miners. I mean, the market cap right now is something like 15 million. You know, if it 10x's from there, if it 100x's from there, you're at the point soon where if that even did like a 5 or 6x, I think something like miners would be earning more in dollar value from the NAT token than Bitcoin fees, not block reward, but Bitcoin fees. And that should be a scary thing to people, that, you know, some new little token, you know, built on some protocol called Tap can be almost more if it went through a decent run in the bull market, providing miners more per 10 minutes than Bitcoin fees. So that's what miners should be thinking about. That's what they should be thinking about. This is an option, but it's free money at this point.
Yeah, I've been privileged enough to be in conversations with miners, and that's really the only spaces and discussions with people who are in the mining industry that I hear the difference between the block rewards and the fees. I think the average person that might be a maxi, or the average person that might just be exploring Bitcoin, doesn't really realize that there's the difference between the block rewards and the fees based on the number of transactions that are happening right now. And I think that was also why, going back to the whole thing, tying all this together, why Casey and what he did with the Ordinals protocol got so much heat is because they didn't truly realize that this created a surge in demand for block space, which also created revenue for miners. And if miners are winning, the network is winning, and so forth. It kind of spills out to all these different areas, because most people aren't running nodes, running miners, and doing all these things. They might just be interacting with the network on a very small scale. So all of this, I think, is really interesting, because it kind of ties all of this together. We kind of touched all areas with the user, the UI. We spoke about miners. We spoke about nodes. I don't know which area of Bitcoin that we haven't necessarily touched. Even we're going to the future of tokenization. We kind of went everywhere. But the last thing, you know,
favorite ordinal.
Yeah,
we haven't spoken about ordinals. Like, what's your favorite ordinal?
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I have. What is my favorite? I'm really interested in the on-chain monkey, simply because they started off on and not because it's your profile picture, but simply because, you know, I saw what they were doing on Ethereum. Because again, as a technical person, I was seeing all the things. Oh yeah, there we go, that were being built. And for them to make that switch over kind of got my attention. And again, it was a controversial time, but I thought it was really cool. Those that were on Ethereum and the whole NFT ecosystem and everything, they were like, why are they going over there? But anyways, if you're a technical person, you go down that rabbit hole, it was kind of obvious why they did that route. But the last thing, as far as any misconceptions, any, I guess you would say, areas that we might have touched, because I said we covered a lot of ground, but I just want to give you the opportunity to clear up any misconceptions, any last words that you'd like to leave with anyone that, might hear this and it might something you think, normally comes up that it's like, man, that really rubbed me the wrong way. But hey, you should have researched this. And if you're upset about anything that was said during this, this is an area that you might want to just do a little research on.
So this might be controversial, but like I could sit here and talk about things when we say misconceptions, things that people believe to be true about something like Tap or believe to be true about something like Track. But quite frankly, I've spent the last few years having those conversations and they're not worth my time, right? Most of the people that want to come and challenge things, they're not prepared to actually go and read anything themselves, but they are prepared to tell you that you're wrong, right? Anything that I've said in the last few years, anything that we've said, there is lots and lots of documentation. There is an incredible amount of documentation. There's an incredible amount of on-chain proof for all these things. Tracksystems.io is the website where you can find Tap Protocol and Track Network. That's TrackSystems. It's on my name on the screen here, tracksystems.io. I would just implore them to go look there. Further than that, my DMs are always open. I'm happy to get on a call. I'm happy to provide documentation. I'm prepared to meet them real life. I've met people in England a few times to go for a beer to talk about the network and stuff and kind of answer questions. Like, if people want to understand, people want to build, people want to use the most advanced toolkits that are available on Bitcoin and beyond, and track peer-to-peer, can't emphasize how important it is that you can run things locally, fully on your hardware. You are not relying on anybody else. It's uncensorable. If we want to transact, do anything, play a game, interact, you want to build any app of any type, it's instant finality and it can settle value to any chain you want. It can interact with Stripe or PayPal, any software, basically, right? It reduces the amount of your overheads. And as I said, back to the Bitcoin side, if you want the transactions to settle on Bitcoin, then go for it. But it doesn't stop the UX. It doesn't stop you from going, I've made this transaction, and now, whether or not it takes Bitcoin 10 minutes or an hour to settle that value down there, doesn't stop me from getting on and doing what I'm doing in the exact same way that when I go and use my bank card, Visa, to go buy a Starbucks, my bank hasn't settled that transaction when I walk out of the door, right? But the finality is instant. And the value it might settle today, it might settle tomorrow. You might see it's pending on your account, but it hasn't settled. That's how the world already works in digital and in finance. Track enables that to work for all of Web3, all of crypto, regardless of where you want to settle your value to. So if it's the Bitcoin bank or the Ethereum bank or the Solana bank, rather than Barclays or HSBC or whatever, that's how we think about it. And we've proved that it works. So there's no me trying to fight misconceptions at this point. There's only me trying to tell you, if you're a developer especially, about the opportunities of building with Track Systems products. And the key ones today are Tap Protocol and Track Network. And the final thing I will say is, I haven't got a date, but it's going to be in the next week or two. We'll be releasing for Track Network something called Track Peer, which is the full documentation about how to actually build in detail the applications that I'm describing here today. You can do it today, but it would take a little bit more of you putting the pieces together yourself. And for a new network, it's not easy as a dev. I'm not a dev, by the way. But that's my catchphrase last few years. But we'll be releasing that. So the Track Network X is worth following, because once that's available, especially with vibe coding, this is kind of a nudge to developers. Vibe coding plus a network like Track plus documentation like Track Peer means you can launch for free, which I should have said earlier, apps that do what I say. It's free to deploy your apps. And if anybody uses your smart contract, if a transaction goes through, it generates TNK, which is the native token of Track Network. So hopefully that's a lot of the things tied up that we didn't say.
Yeah, definitely. And you also answered a question from the comments, which is, does this work with Claudebot? Well, the whole vibe coding thing that was just mentioned right there with Claudebot, that's definitely something that's coming down the pipeline. But I think this is really great. We covered all sorts of areas on this. This is really exciting, my friend. And those of you that don't know, it's at Fitzy OG. We'll have all the information out there in the comments and so forth. And of course, we're going to send this out multiple different ways. So if you have not gotten in touch with them, it's really worth your time. And I really appreciate that, hanging out with us, just chatting for the last almost hour. And hopefully everyone listening to this really got some benefit out of this. Really appreciate it. It was fun, my friend. I'd love to do this again.
Mate, anytime. Pleasure. This is even better than the spaces. To see your face as we talk is a pleasure. So thank you.
Yep. And have a nice day. And thank you, everyone. Please check out the Wolf page. We are about to start a space. So those of you that are familiar with Cade's voice, you can hang out with him in about 2 minutes. So thanks for hanging out with us on the stream.